Thank you very much. Kevin Hirano. Just a little bit about me because I feel very inadequate. Such amazing speakers. Thank you so much, Aziz. Incredibly, very inspiring. So I used to work at the Open Society Gates Foundation, and I bring about 15 years of nonprofit leadership experience to APIA Vote. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what can we do in terms of taking action. We had a lot of conversation about political power that we have to build and something about in terms of how big the Asian American Pacific Islander community really is. And I'll show you a little bit about that. So let's advance one. Great. So who is APIA Vote? So Asian and Pacific Islander American Vote is the leading national nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to building power and empowering Asian American Pacific Islander communities across the country. Can advance. And the way we do this is framed in 4 different areas, right? We create effective partnerships, are working with AAUC, no, not yet. We work from a center of nonpartisan engagement, which is different from partisan, C3 versus C4. And I'll explain a little bit about that in my chat. We're committed to justice, equality, and fairness, and we really are about getting Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders equally out to vote. And core to those frameworks is the fact that we believe in the democratic process, that every voice counts, and this is about active participation. We cannot, as I think was been mentioned as many times over the past couple of days, we can't be passive, but it also requires us to educate and inspire people to get out to vote, right? Let's advance. So how does API work? API Vote works in 4 different areas, specifically our national field program, our policy and data research, youth engagement, and strategic communications. You can hit the next one. So our national field program. So we're a national organization that invests in local community or based organizations. We work in 28 different states. We provide them with sub-grants between $10,000 and $30,000. And then we also provide them with national support in terms of technical expertise, access to data, which is the VAN, which is the Voter Access Network, so has every single voter's information. If you are registered, you are in this, and we give them access to that and training in terms of how to use it effectively. Our youth engagement, youth is the future. According to a recent Harvard youth poll, Asian American youths are extremely excited. 20% of respondents to the Harvard poll did this earlier this year. Were extremely excited to vote, and they were committed and promised to vote in the election. However, on the other side, they are very unimpressed or not trustworthy of the government officials that are being elected. And so it is our job to ensure that we make the youth understand that you've promised to vote and you need to make the time to vote in the states that count. Our policy and data. For a long time, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders were not included in many polls at all. Black, Hispanic, white were pretty much what you were seeing. API Vote has spent a ton of time and dedication to changing that perception, that APIs need to be included in data, in policy, in everything in terms of decision making, and that's what we do. And then finally, importantly, strategic communications. As Aziz was saying, we need to have our voices heard. But we also make sure that our communities are able to have access to the right information in the languages that they're most comfortable in. While most of our community has English proficiency, the fact is that a lot of our communities also speak and read other languages. And it's important for us to make sure that we provide that information in the language, but that they also see themselves, people who look like you and me, on the ballot, on the pieces on newspapers. Everywhere we go, we can't just see white faces because that's very exclusionary. We have to be a part of the democratic process, and we have to see ourselves in that process as well. So what is our impact? So API Vote translates over 1 million pieces of mail on every federal election every 2 years. We get out the vote in 28 different states, and we also produce video and multimedia content that focuses and centers our community. You can advance, yeah, thank you. How does this translate in specific examples, right? So we, in 2020, we kicked off a unique strategy, which is geofenced digital ads to get people out to vote. These are ads that were translated as well as in English, showcase Asian faces and targeted messaging for our votes. Those reached a million, as you can see, 1 million people were served with our digital ads, and this is only in 8 markets. That increased voter turnout by 21%. So we know this works. By people seeing themselves in the act of voting, that they see that themselves, that when they vote, they're voting for issues that matter to them, not someone that doesn't look like them. They come out to vote. You can move to the next one. We're also increasing our presence. In every 4 years, API Vote hosts a presidential town hall. And in 2020, it was the first year that then nominee Joe Biden and former Guam representative from the Trump campaign both addressed our over 1 million people who tuned in and watched our presidential town hall. It was incredibly powerful, and we are looking to replicate this. As we got on Politico, we were on every single major news coverage for 2 weeks after the presidential town hall. Let's move one more. So why is this important, right? These are the issues that came up in our poll, our recent poll of Asian American, which was done in language in the top 6 groupings, which is Chinese, Hindi, Korean, and Vietnamese. These are the top 4 issues that came up. We're concerned about healthcare, we're concerned about public safety, we're concerned about jobs and economy, and education. But really, when you're thinking about it, the people to really make change in any one of these areas outside of asking for it, or one more, are the people in charge. The governor of Nevada, the school boards, all these people are elected in. And to be honest with you, people are getting elected in on less than 100,000 votes. The margin of victory for every one of these elected officials, or the officials who are appointing people who are making these decisions, are being elected at very, very thin margins. And as this country continues to be more divided politically, the margins are getting thinner and thinner. And I'll show you that we can advance. That Asian Americans are going to be that margin of victory. We continue to grow in numbers, and we are actually a lot more undecided in terms of party affiliation. And so it's a huge opportunity for us, as well as for political parties, to engage us, and that's what we have to ask. And that's where I think this quote was mentioned this day. We have to be at that table, and that's what that means. We have to make our voices heard. We have to make sure that we are organized and we know what our positions are in these areas, and that what are we asking for? What does public safety mean to our communities, right? So for API Vote, this is our solution to the problem. Right. It comes in 3 areas. So it's about making sure that our communities come out to vote on a consistent basis. When our community comes out to vote, and leaders like you are able to influence their vote, or at least make sure that they come out to vote on a regular, consistent manner, that's when politicians start paying attention to us. That's when we're getting out there and having the power and exercising our power, both on the table of decision making, as well as the areas in terms of getting people the services they need and the service that they want, right? Too fast. Yeah. The other thing, this is also important during off years. Our work doesn't end when the election ends. Our work starts to continue because we have to hold those officials accountable, right? It is not enough for us to get out the vote. It is making sure that the people that we vote in, because we know we've got them in because of the margin of victory, that we hold them accountable for the things that they promised for us to do, and we're consistent in terms of those pressures. And the way we do that is making sure that we hold our communities together, and we communicate in an effective manner. Yeah. So let's talk about numbers here. So this is based on the 2020 US Census. So Asian Americans today, this is just Asian Americans, are 5.7% of the US populations. With Pacific Islanders, that's 6.1%. So that may seem small, but when you think about it, like I said, the margins of victory for many, both local, state, and federal races are being won by less than that. And so it is important as we grow, because by 2060, which is only 40 years away, we're going to be 44, we're going to double our population. And that means we're going to be doubling the percentage that we represent within the United States. That's over 10%, both APIs, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. So it is important for all communities to work together, because as we work as a coalition, Asian Americans, and acknowledging the unique needs and requirements of our Pacific Islander brothers and sisters, it's important that we work together, because we have a larger field, right? We can advance. So where is this being driven by? Like we're talking today, it's being driven by immigration. We're not birthing ourselves into the majority. We are immigrating. And so by right now, U.S. population who are identified are immigrants are being led by Hispanics. But as you see, by 2065, Asian Americans will surpass that. It's an exponential growth of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders coming into the United States and becoming U.S. Hello? Okay. So, so immigration is important. Language access, voter education, right? Understanding the process, our democratic process, is going to be incredibly important as we move forward. Right. The other thing, outside of population, are we voting? So the answer to that maybe in 2016, the answer to that was no. Asian Americans were not voting at the numbers that we should have been voting. But that all changed in 2020. We increased our voting participation by 46%. The national average is 12. So while, yes, there was a huge, unique bump in 2020, everyone voted at higher numbers. Asian Americans particularly voted at extremely higher numbers. And that's because of the work that we do, AAUC, and a number of organizations around the country who are highly focused on making sure our community understood the importance of the vote, how to vote, and the process upon which this all affects their lives, right? So this is how it all breaks down to give you a sense of voter registration and voter turnout. You can see that while we're still number 3, we still have a lot of room. We have the numbers to surpass everyone else, right? And the fact is that there's enthusiasm to vote. We increased by 10% in terms of voter turnout between 2016 and 2020. And over that, by 2016 through 2020 in terms of registered voters. We're making strides, but there's still more room to go. And the way we are doing it, Asian Americans voted early, more than any other community, any other racial grouping. We voted early. And so it is important for us, particularly from a policy perspective, to protect the vote, our ability to vote early, right? And a lot of this is because, one, I think I got a lot of questions about who do we vote for? It's a big question that we get from our community. I don't understand what this proposition means or all of this. It is important for us to have the time to consider and be educated voters, so that's why early voting is so important. It is your right to vote. We know that it's safe. We know that voting early is not a way for us to conjure up new votes. This has been going on for a long time, and in states like California, Utah, Nevada, early voting and mail-in ballots are automatic. And so we know that the model works, and this is not just an experiment. So, go back one. Not yet. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, sorry. No, we're good. We can move forward. Yeah, go forward. We'll go to the data. So what do we know about our communities? What do we know? What are their preferences? So we do know this, is that we're not surveyed at all. We're particularly not surveyed in the languages so if somehow a surveyor calls a household that doesn't speak English with proficiency, they're gonna hang up, right? But we do it opposite. So since 2014, ABI Vote has done the earliest voter survey of Asian Americans in language. And so that means we do it in Chinese, Korean, Hindi, we do it in Bengali, and we do it in 2 or 3 other languages, including Vietnamese, Filipino and Vietnamese, to get an understanding of what is it that, what are the issues that are important to them, and what in terms of messaging it resonates with our community. Now we can move. So what does that mean? All right, so here are some of the survey results from this year. We know that parties are not reaching out to us. The blue that says that they've been contacted by a party, either Democratic or Republican, and yellow is not. So you can see for all Asian Americans, all respondents, it's about half have been responded. We know that for white communities, it's much, much higher. But then as you go down, for Indian respondents, our Japanese respondents, and our Filipino respondents, it's less than 60% have been reached out to. And that's a problem. When Asian American population is right now, is 6%, about 6% of our population. The Indian population is 21% of that, and the Chinese percentage of that is 24%. You have to talk to these two groups in order, because you represent the largest portion of the Asian American bloc. And so if they're not talking to us, we don't know what the issues are, we don't know who the candidates are, and it's important for them to do that. We can advance. Party identification, like I said, there are lots of mainstream media reports right now saying, oh, Asian Americans are becoming more Republican. The fact of the matter is that we are slightly more Democratic than not, but there is a large portion of us who are just not identifying as politically identified. And that's important. That's important for everyone to know, and so that we know that we are the deciding vote, that we haven't made our minds up, and so we can move into the issues that are important to us. This is fine, thank you. So the top 5 issues, right? Healthcare, jobs and economy, inflation, crime, education, and gun control are the top issues. And while this may fall in line very much with the rest of the United States, we have very specific ways of looking at why these issues are top of mind, right? But it's important, again, it's important that we know that this is what the Asian American population believes in. We can advance. This is giving a sense of our perception, our respondents' perception of where we think which party is doing better on which issue, right? The important thing to look at here is the number of no difference and I don't know. The fact is, because parties don't speak to us, it's hard for us to have an understanding of who's doing a better job in what, if we're not being spoken to specifically in any one of those things. This is in terms of multilingual. So we specifically asked whether or not you speak another language at home. This is not a question about whether English proficiency. This is about speaking another language, right? And so we have a huge number of our population that speaks another language, which is why for us, our focus is on making sure that a core tenet of our work is translation and having people see themselves in our material. And this is another one in terms of voter education, right? Just about half of Asian American respondents would use language assistance. This gives us an indication of whether or not they would need help at the polls. Understanding the written language of how to, who's on the ballot, how to vote, all of that. It gives us a reason why voting early and mail-in ballots are so important to our community. Yeah. All right, so how does this all play out in terms of what I was saying, the margin of victory, right? We can advance now. So this is the 2020 results. The blue area is the margin of victory. This is where President Biden won in these states, or at least this is how so you can see in Arizona, the margin of victory was less than 100,000, less than 50,000. And in Texas, the margin of victory for the contestant who won there was slightly over 500,000. In the red area, that's where the number of Asian American Pacific Islanders who voted, right? So you can see that the area between those two lines, we are significantly higher in terms of numbers of votes than the margin of victory. That's what we're saying. So that this area between the red and the blue, That's where our power is. That's where we lie. And the fact is we're still underperforming. We can still get more people out to vote who feel that they don't understand. We have the power to increase that margin and then get out there and bang the drum and say, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, if you want to win, it's on our community. So this is another example in terms of senatorial. We'll go one step down. So the margins here are even thinner, right? So the blue area, again, is the margin of victory for senatorial wins, and the red area is the margin of is the number of Asian Americans who voted in those areas. It's interesting. I put in Minnesota because you can see it's reversed, but you can see that there is still a margin that we can still get the votes out. In Minnesota, Asian Americans increased their numbers proportionally by double digits. And so we're growing and we're going to become a force moving forward. We can move forward. So this year, where are the races that we are going to be most influential? And I put up these 10 states where, 7 states where we are going to be making the biggest difference in terms of numbers. And these races are going to be similar to what we saw. The margins of victory are going to be very thin, and these are the areas where we have the opportunity to go ahead and make that difference. Right. So, like I said, so why nonpartisan? We talked a lot about partisan work. For us, our perception of partisan work is short-term goals because it's all about winning. Of course, when you're a candidate, your number one goal is to be not a candidate, but to be the elected official. So you're focused on winning. You really don't care about the relationships. You're just focused on numbers and how to get the numbers out so that they can win. So for API Vote, we are less interested in the short term and slash and burn. We can advance. Just press the button. We're focused on changing behaviors. We're focused on making sure that our communities are more than just numbers. They're people. They're people we care about. They're people with needs, and they're people that want to be successful. And that requires they have access to the same amount of resources that everyone else in the United States gets. And so that's what we are all about. We focus on building the power of our community to have a say in how they can live their lives and be successful in this country. So what are some actions you can take? For API Vote, we invite you to join us in a national action into what we call the civic holidays. There are four dates where on a national level, and all of our partners in all 28 states, as well as other partners across the United States are working on these dates for to get the people to register to vote, to educate people. We'll take a whole week to educate people about what is voting, what is your civic responsibility, what does that mean, how does that turn into you getting the benefits and you getting the resources that you pay your taxes to provide. And then early voting day, right? That we know that Asian Americans vote early. And so we take a day to make sure that people understand their rights to vote early, and so that they stay within the guidelines, especially now that voting rights and voting laws have significantly changed after the 2020 election. And so that day is particularly important for us. And then finally, we have to make sure that we celebrate those who volunteer and work at the polls. Without them, we can't move it forward. So some examples. So here in Vegas, they do some fun things. This doesn't have to be boring. One of their key events are petting zoos with goats. And so they have an exclusive contract with a farm that they get. These are the get out the vote goats for ACDC here in Vegas. Yeah. And then, of course, you use any opportunity, creative opportunity, to connect the services and things that are important to you in your life with the idea of voting, so we can advance one. Business services. On the left, you can see those are COVID tests. ACDC, at least in Las Vegas, if you agree or disagree, the legalization of marijuana is they get out in front of dispensaries because they want to make people understand the point of this is happening because people voted, right? That literally is because of the people who turned out to vote that this is your right to do. And so we want to make sure that we're connecting very hard, very directly, the fact that the services and things that that run your life and that you have access to is connected to your ability and your willingness to vote and register. You can advance, right? And of course, it's about focusing on the youth, and so making it as fun and interactive as you possibly can, relatable. That's what ACDC did. Some examples of that. So thank you so much for spending a little bit of your time about API Vote and taking some actions. And if you have any questions, I'll be around, but I'm happy to take some now.
Kevin, thanks very much for the great work that APIA does. You all have been a great resource to our reportage over the years, and I know you work with Professor Karthik Ramakrishnan too at the University of California and Riverside in terms of getting out the numbers in terms of South Asians, Indian Americans, etc. One of the problems, I think the youth have been very much mobilized now and are gung-ho about getting out the vote and registering to vote, etc. But I don't think this is exclusive just to the Indian American community. There are, whom we call our aunties and uncles. You've been here for 30, 40 years, but still hold on to just their green cards and not been naturalized. And we boast about the South Asian American community, the Indian American community being 4 million. They bandy numbers like nobody's business. But I remember when we did a survey some time ago and we went out, we found the significant numbers of our aunties and uncles and others who haven't become naturalized citizens. And like you said, Asian Americans have made a huge difference in very, very close races. And just imagine if we can get those people also to naturalize, and because they haven't gone back to the home country, they've been here for 30, 40 years and still hanging on to their green cards without naturalizing. And I think ethnic newspapers, especially unlike in the South Asian community where they are very well versed in English, language papers which they read religiously about news from back home, even though they've been here for 40, 50 years. How do we try to make the difference to them in terms of getting naturalized and making sure they get out the vote? Because we could become a significant presence, an indispensable presence, and get these guys, congressmen, senators, to come covet us instead of us having to have fundraisers for them.
Thank you so much for that question. And yes, Karthik is an amazing person who has really done so much to do the analysis of the data that exists to get our numbers out there. He focuses very much on making sure we get that disaggregated data so we understand that it's not just Asian Americans. We have our own communities, and it's important for us to get that out. But to answer your question, for us, the answer is local. Right? API Vote is a national organization, but there's no way that we understand the unique perspectives that our aunties and uncles have for why they don't want to. I think a perfect example of mobilization was yesterday about bringing them along, having them visually see that their vote, their participatory, their presence in our democratic process has power, right? And so finding those opportunities as community leaders, as leaders of organizations, to create opportunities to get them to interact with the places of power, the people of decision making, and understand that there's a connection here. You can choose those people. But I also say this: in the United States, Asian Americans American-born Asians are the fastest growing in terms of population, right? So 60% of 60% of Asian Americans born in the United States are Gen Z. So the fact is that chart I'm showing by 2060, we're going to be 44.6 million. That's all being driven by young people. And as much as I love our aunties and uncles, we have to meet people where they are. We can't force them to do things. We can create the opportunities for them to understand, but they are who they are. And so we have to see the opportunity of where it is. And that's where they're young people. There are so many of them, which is great. And we need to make sure that we provide them, they want to vote, right? So one, we have to model. We have to model the fact that when you vote, they're most likely to vote. Right? And then second of all, get them involved. Have them understand that, yes, there is an argument to be made that one vote may not count. right? Statistically, one vote may not count. But when you multitude that, when they're in community and they're in a room full of all their friends and their families and their neighbors, and you're all talking about that issue that everybody agrees on, and when you vote on that one issue, that's 100, 500, 10,000 people who are voting on that one issue, and that's the margin of victory. That's the power. And so I feel like it is about creating those opportunities for our aunties and uncles to understand what voting actually means. And then on the other side, it is about looking for the opportunities that we do have and providing and going after that. We have one here as well. Yeah.
So in my conversations with community members across the U.S., there's oftentimes a perception that a lot of the outreach efforts, even though they say they're nonpartisan, they lean in particular directions. So that sometimes stifles the efforts to reach out to everyone because people say, well, I don't know whether they welcome this movement. Why might you tell those of us in the community that are doing this kind of outreach to ensure that it is an nonpartisan and internal approach? And is there an importance of having, and we're obviously all very different, especially on the individual level, on where we might land on issues, where is there solutions, and which parties promising to follow one of those solutions. So two-part question, what do we do to allay those concerns? And second question, what are your overall thoughts on the need of political diversity and what do we need to get?
Yeah, both great questions. So to answer your first question, right? So there are structural issues, there are structural rules that prevent C3 organizations from doing political lobbying, right? There was talk about that, but so it's built into the system that we should. But that being said, there are many organizations that do these kinds of advocacy work with a slight bend, right? For API Vote, that's why we focus primarily on power building and also focusing on the fact that it's local organizations that understand their communities. And so it is, for us, it's about making sure we lean into the facts of voting, right? It is not for us to go ahead and say whether or not what you should vote in. And in fact, our democratic process, it can only survive and thrive when there's political diversity. That's how we move this forward. It is not the most efficient way of making decisions. It is not the most efficient way to make sure everybody gets what they want. But it is important for us to come together and participate and have our voices heard. And so for us, it is the way we do our trainings, the way we reinforce this is through training and providing those materials and resources to make sure that the organizations that we support are able to and have the language to do nonpartisan voter education, voter outreach, that sort of thing. And then and so the political diversity thing, for us, we work with everyone. API Vote, when we do a couple of things in Washington, D.C. So we have, for every administration, we do a appointee gathering for Asian and Pacific Islanders. And then we also, during the summertime, it's high time for all of our youth interns to come to Washington, D.C. And so we do a gathering for them as well. And so it doesn't matter. We don't do it just for Democrats. We don't do it just for Republicans. And in fact, Christine and I are always invited. Our National Hispanic Month and National Asian American History Month is packed with both parties. But it's important for us to make sure that we have friends on both sides of the aisle because it's incumbent on both sides to engage with our communities. And so I hope that answers your question.
Hey, Kevin. Nice to meet you. My name is Haipei with UCA. We worked a lot with you guys.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for the wonderful work. But I'm going to put you on the spot for something,
Sure.
if you don't mind. 2 questions. Number 1, I noticed that in your slides, you said API Vote is committed to equity. Now, normally this is not a problem at all. But in some particular context, I want to know what's your personal understanding of equity in our current political atmosphere or in partisan perspectives. If you want to narrow that down to some specific issues in terms of equity, let's say education. San Francisco recall successfully, with a landslide, recalled three school board members who has voted for equity in terms of the change of the admission criteria of Lowell's High School there. So that's just give you an example of what do you mean when we say we are committed to equity. And the second question is, what is your personal, nothing to do with AAPI vote, what's your personal reading of this fact that after 4 years of nonstop abusing of Asian American, Latino, and Black by our previous president, Asian American voted in 2020 compared with 2016, like 3 or 4% higher. You can correct me on that, but in general, it is quite a few percentage higher for the former president. For Black community is also 3 or 4% higher. For Latino community is also 4 or 5% higher. I don't remember exact numbers. What is your personal take on this? Thank you.
Thank you, Haipai. Yes, I do know, and it's wonderful to meet you as well. Thank you so much for those questions. So for equity, it's very similar to what was my respondents here, right? So it's not equity on a particular issue. It's not a very progressive definition of equity, right? Equity is making sure, as I said, it's being driven by our commitment to democracy. Democracy is about division, like the diversity of perspectives. We need to make sure that everyone has an equal and equitable access to the vote. This is not about exclusionary factors. This is not about having my perception that equity is some leftist concept that it's all about flowers and rainbows and everybody's going to have equal access. We know that the world is not equal, but we should, at least in America, for us to have an equal access to the vote, to make sure that we are applying the rule of law when it comes to voting. That is what equity means to me, and that's what equity means to APIA vote. And then, so from your second question in terms of why Asian Americans, Blacks, and Hispanics are coming out to vote, that is a good question. I don't know about necessarily, I can't respond to the Black and Hispanic vote, but I can say about the Asian American Pacific Islander vote. The fact that we have people in this room is why people turned out to vote. The fact that we have a growing number. So Haipe, you may know, back in the 1990s, there were only 4 organizations in Washington, D.C. 4 organizations that represented Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And really, only Asian Americans. There were no organizations representing Pacific Islanders in Washington, D.C. That was OCA, JACL, the precursor to AJC, and then I'm forgetting the last one. You have to excuse me. But since the 90s to today, there are over 80 different organizations in Washington, D.C. representing Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in almost every way you can possibly imagine. Asian Americans are coming out to understanding that it's they themselves that have to not only protect themselves in insular communities, but we have to get out, organize ourselves, and make sure that we're getting access to the rights and resources that our government and we're paying taxes for, right? And so that to me that explains that, right? I think it's a long time coming. It wasn't just because of the attacks. Of course, that certainly helped. I don't think 46% increase between 2016 and 2020 simply is just like a slow burn of increase of resources and support. Certainly there was some level of external pressures and fear. But I also believe that increase in voting also was driven by the fact that people understood that they were able to vote early, that they didn't have to put themselves at risk of going to the polls in person, right? And so being able to vote safely at home with the ability to understand what's on the ballot, that also contributed. So I think there was multiple factors, but I do believe that it's like groups like this, people like you that get out and try to help people understand the power of your vote and the multiplying factor that when they vote and they encourage others to vote, that we're moving the needle. that's, to me, that explains that. I hope I answered your question.
We have about a minute.
Yes, I'll make sure I share that.
Second thing, I've been involved in the mobilization for registration. I'm talking 30 years back, we used to put DingDingTV and do this kind of work. But what I'm seeing right now is that even another thing that track of what is happening here, as you said, Chinese and Indian Americans are the largest two groups. I don't see any concerted effort by any Indian American group right now in terms of educating people to register for. What's happening right now is that we have a councilman running for Indian person running in New York City or any other place. She or he will go and get Indians to register for a decent city, a decent town or something like that. But I think what we could do from the Indian community perspective, this is a great thing. Can you get things can go through social media, especially WhatsApp, because our people are all, we can take it out of WhatsApp in either way. I don't know whether your strategy of getting to come to the park with some snacks and things like that. I don't know whether how effective it is, but social media is the only way I feel, because I think we could use that, what you create.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm happy to exchange information. We can share with you. We have information translated to Hindi, Punjabi, Bengali. We have it in multiple different South Asian languages. And I will say, it is about our regional partners. So in the New York, Northwest, Northeast region, we do work with partners based in New Jersey who work, New Jersey. But I will say we have a very strong presence in Texas with our South Asian partners there. It's called Save Texas. But there we do. It is all based on recruitment of organizations that are interested to do the work, and we work with you to do those kinds of. So we're in a constant mode of identification and recruitment for these things. And again, our resources are all available. So I'm making sure we connect and we can share that with you as well.
Kevin, thank you very much. We are at time. Let's continue this discussion over.
Yeah, I can talk with you later.
Let's continue this discussion
Yeah.
over break. We're taking a 10-minute break, folks, right now, and then we'll meet back here at 10:25 to get started for our next session.